Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, back with a couple more cards using some of the new release products from Simon Says Stamps Hello Gorgeous release. And of course I gravitated towards the other large floral set that was released, and this one is also fabulous. This is the Mother's Day Tulips stamp set. It is huge. This stamp it's just massive and I love it. So I am putting it in my MISTI and I'm stamping it onto some Canson XL watercolor paper that as of right now is 4 inches by 8.5. To give you an idea of how big this stamp is. It's perfect for Slimline cards. It'll be perfect for 5x7 cards. You could use part of the image for, a standard A2 card. So I used my anti-static powder tool on the watercolor paper, and then I inked up the stamp with Simon's clear embossing ink, and I'm going to ink this up and stamp it twice just because it is a large image, and anytime I stamp with clear embossing ink onto watercolor paper, I want to stamp it more than once because you literally can't see it. Like, you can't tell if you got the whole image stamped, so it's better to be safe than sorry. So once I've got it stamped, I'm going to use Simon's cream embossing powder. Just a matter of preference. You could use white embossing powder for this. It'll be fine. I was just in a mood to use this. I hadn't used it in a while, and I really like this. It looks more like beige almost in a sense when you first pour it on, but when it melts, it is more of just like a cream, kind of an off-white. And it goes really nicely with most watercolor papers. It's not so stark white. And I don't know what it is. I just really like it. So once I got that on, I am going to melt that with my heat tool. And then tilt it back and forth in the light. Make sure I got everything melted. There's no grainy areas, things like that. And then I'll repeat the process for a second panel because while I had everything out, why not do more than one? Also, because I couldn't make up my mind what color combo to do. So I was like, I'm going to do 2. So I've got both pieces. They've been heat embossed. I taped them down. I've got this big old cutting board. Any sort of hardboard will work. So I have it taped it down with painter's tape. And then I just have my little white plastic palette. And I'm smushing a bunch of colors of distress inks. So for my greenery, I'm doing my go-to fave combo, which is Twisted Citron, Mowed Lawn, and Rustic Wilderness. And then for one of the combos of tulip bulbs or flowers, I'm using Saltwater Taffy, because I'm obsessed with it, and Dried Marigold and Abandoned Coral. And the other combo is going to be Saltwater Taffy, Picked Raspberry, and Villainous Potion. So I also wanted to do sort of more subtle, messy watercoloring. I have done all sorts of variations of this on my channel over the years, sometimes more intense, sometimes really intense, like drippy looks or different things. With this, I'm just going subtle. So all I did was I took just a wide brush with clean water, painted the whole surface of that panel with the clean water so it's just wet, and then I just picked up starting with the Twisted Citron, and I was applying it kind of outside the lines, so it just kind of moves and creates that just soft little sort of halo of color. And I did the same thing with the Saltwater Taffy sort of around the blooms. Again, I kept it subtle. You could go more intense with it, you could have fun with it. I haven't done the outside the lines watercolor in a while, and as soon as I start doing these sorts of things again, I'm like, oh yes. So I did that with both panels. And then I'm painting the greenery, and I'm just using my little watercolor, like my Ranger Detail water brush. But off camera, I have a dish of water, and I'm just dipping it into that. I don't know what it is, but lately I've been kind of obsessed with this. And rather than just using a regular paintbrush, I like using this with my distress inks, my oxides. That's what I used in a previous video with watercoloring with oxide inks, was this little water brush. So I painted the greenery with those 3 distress inks. And then this one, I did the Saltwater Taffy, the Dried Marigold, and the Abandoned Coral. So I got this peachy, orangey coral color, which I love. And then this one was the Saltwater Taffy, Picked Raspberry, and the Villainous Potion, which also love. Just, I don't know, this stamp set is fabulous. Like the size of it and the size of the blooms, you could have so much fun just experimenting, and there's a bajillion different types of tulips out there, but at the same time, just do whatever floats your boat, you know? Like, you can just do anything and it's fun. So I painted everything. Once I was done painting everything, of course, I'm going to add some splatter. So my first bit of splatter is just clean water because these were done with distress inks. It's water reactive. So I splattered it with water, let it sit for 30 seconds or so, and then just pressed a paper towel onto it to pick up that splatter, and it creates, you know, that fun splattery water effect look. And then I'm going to add more splatter, as one does. I'm going to use my white gouache, squeeze that onto my palette. I'm going to mix that really well with some water, and then heavily splatter this onto both backgrounds. So once I've got that splatter all over, and it will be way more subtle as it dries because the gouache will absorb a bit of the color from the background as well. So it's all good. Once I added that splatter, I also pulled out my Perfect Pearl powder in Perfect Pearl because once you start splattering, you can't stop. And also this adds shimmer, which I will show at the end too. When the light catches it, it's just fabulous. So put a bit of that on my palette, mix that with water. And then this one I heavily splattered all over because it just, there's something about this, you in a sense can't even go overboard with the Perfect Pearl powder as splatter. It's just, it's so pretty. So splattered these backgrounds, let everything dry completely, made sure it was all dry, and then I just removed the painter's tape. I wasn't too worried with these because I was planning on cutting them down anyway to a bit smaller. But you always want to make sure anything you've watercolored is completely dry, because if it's still wet at all, when you remove the tape, it'll just tear. It'll start peeling up the layers of the watercolor paper like hot mess. And trust me, I've done it. Just my impatience has not served me well sometimes. So removed all the tape. I ended up trimming these panels down off camera to 3 inches by 8 inches. Usually I don't really pay attention to the measurements, you know, I'm just doing my thing, but my card bases are going to be 3.5 inches by 8.5 inch slimline cards. So I have panels of just thinner white cardstock that are also right now, they're 3.5 by 8.5. I will trim those down before I adhere them, but I'm putting those into my MISTI, and I've repositioned that large stamp. And I'm going to stamp that with Simon's Fog ink, just my like go-to neutral. It's just soft and really subtle. So I ink that up with the Fog ink, stamp that onto this panel. I'm going to repeat the process on a second panel. Once I have these stamped with this tulip image in light gray ink, I'm going to pull out a sentiment from this same stamp set, and I'm going to line that up on these panels, like on the lower kind of third of these panels. And I'm going to ink it up with some coordinating Distress Oxide inks, because when it comes to stamping with different inks, I use the Distress inks and Distress Oxides, you know, watercoloring for all the different sorts of techniques. But when it comes to specifically stamping with them, I prefer the oxides because the pigments in them, you just get a better impression. So for one of the panels, I stamped the sentiment with the Saltwater Taffy Distress Oxide ink. And then the other panel, I inked up the stamp with the Villainous Potion Distress Oxide ink, which is just, again, chef's kiss. Such a gorgeous purple. So stamp those panels, and then I can set them aside, let that oxide ink completely dry while I go on to the next portion of these cards, which is going to be the sentiments I use on the front of the cards. So I have the All About Mom stamp set, and I really love this You Are Wonderful sentiment. So I have pieces of cardstock that I used for the card bases. I know the purple is Simon's Royal Purple. This sort of orangey color, I don't have a source for, apologies. It was in my stash. It doesn't have a label, and usually I know everything on site, but this one I am not sure where it came from. I just picked out a color that was the closest to like the kind of corally orange color, you know. So anyway, I heat emboss those sentiments, and then I die cut them with a coordinating wafer die. And then my backgrounds, like I said, I trimmed them down, and I'd also trimmed down some Fog cardstock, slightly larger, and I'm adhering those together with some Craft Tacky glue. And I just get them adhered, make sure everything's straight and lined up. And then I flip it over to apply pressure to make sure everything's adhered, because I don't like rubbing my hands a lot or pressing a lot with my hands on anything that I've done watercoloring or anything that has, you know, water reactive inks on it, because the oils from my hands can start smearing things. You never know with me. It's better to be safe than sorry. So I flip it over, press it down really well with my hands. And then the panels for the inside, I trimmed down a little bit and then coated those with a little bit of craft tacky glue and adhered those to the insides of my card bases, which, like I said, these will be 3.5 inch by 8.5 inch slimline cards. So I adhered those panels on the inside, just all matchy here. And then the card fronts, I coated the backs of those with Simon's Big Mama foam tape. So it'll adhere really well, but it'll give it that little bit of dimension that I love without making it super bulky like normal foam tape. And I did the same thing with the Heat Emboss sentiments. I just put little bits of the Big Mama foam tape on the back of those as well, and then adhered those into place. And I was just going to add a bit of bling and call it a day, but there was enough space. These are slimline cards. They're big, and it was meant to be. And I never put this die set away anyway. It's the Etched Dragonfly that came out forever ago that I've done a bajillion videos with. So I die cut the wings from, of course, Lawn Fawn pearlescent vellum, and the bodies from the same, just scraps of cardstock left over from the card bases. And then I adhered those to my cards. They're flying around these fabulous little tulips. And then once those were adhered, I added, finally, my bling, which is some just Trinity stamps. They're called Bubble Blowout. They're just little circle, like, kind of bubbles. On camera, they look kind of just clear, but they've got that, like, little bit of iridescent shine to them. They're so pretty. So they go perfectly with the tulips and the dragonflies and the splatter and just, yeah. You guys know. You know. Anyway. Adhered those into place with dabs of craft tacky glue. And then once those are adhered, these cards are complete. And I'll, like, tilt these in the light so you guys can see the shimmer, splatter, and the shimmer of the wings. And just, these were fun to make. So this was also part of a blog hop that is going on to share inspiration for this release. This is day 2 of blog hops, so there's tons of inspiration. So I will have links and info about that in my blog post, which will be linked directly below this video. I will also have a supply list and links to all the supplies I used, so you guys can check that out below if you are interested. And then, as always, thank you all so much for watching, for subscribing, for thumbs upping, commenting. You can hit the bell beside the subscribe button to receive notifications when I upload. Always check my social media, though, because all the algorithms and things don't always work, you know. So, thank you, though. And, as always, I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!